Minister, I'm sure like you, I was very proud yesterday in Dublin Castle at the commissioning of 67, 68 of our cadets into the Irish Defence Forces, and indeed the Maltese young officers who were there. And I thought the cooperation actually with Malta in that way is an exemplary of the way we can work in cooperation in the world. And it was very moving. I mean, those young men and women will do us proud. You can tell some of them through because you know them and you know their family, but also the sense of them as a team together is that they will do our country proud, as our Army, our Navy and our Air Force have done down through the years. But there was such a sense, in my mind, on the occasion when they swore allegiance to the state, to the Constitution, to our Republic, and also to this House in a way, to recognising that they get their direction, their strategic missions are set by us here, and it gives us such a sense of responsibility that we have to get that right, and we have to make sure that we do right by them. And in all sorts of other ways, we need to make sure that we pay them properly, and that the disorganisation we've put into our armed forces in that mix-up of battalions and everything that was done a few years ago has to be reversed now, so that we really get our organisational structures right, in my mind. But more importantly, as those young men and women, the average age 23, let's think of the next 20 or 30 years where they will fulfil the promise that they made yesterday and they gave yesterday. And we look at the world that they're going into. And I think any dispassionate assessment of where we're at would raise a sense of caution about what's happening in a European particularly, but also within a global context. Any assessment of, if we listen to the French and German presidents, we know we're involved in realpolitik, the larger states have such an influence. But when the French president says very clearly he wants a true European army, to handle the Russian threat, to reduce our reliance on the US, and the German Chancellor backs that up, that is something is that really how we see ourselves, or we see the strategic direction that we need to take in military terms in this world? And when we listen to the President of the European Commission, President Juncker, in his State of the Union speech a couple of years ago, saying that a strong, competitive and innovative defence industrial base is what will give us strategic autonomy. Do we really think that is the strategic direction that will best serve those young officers and the soldiers and seamen and women and aviators that they will work with over the years? Is that what we think is going to really serve them, by us buying into that sort of vision that it's a strong industrial base? In a world where there's all sorts of complications involving military technology, where the use of drone technology, which we seem to be fetting in our European statements, in the advancement of robotics, which creating all sorts of very complex ethical dilemmas around the use of military force. And that's what has me in my mind saying we are not serving those officers well if we just buy into that narrative and think that's the future security that's going to work best for the Irish people, for the European people, or for the wider world. And you hear it again and again in the launch of the European Defence Fund. The Vice President of the Commission, Catanian, saying the fund will act as a catalyst for a strong European defence industry which develops cutting-edge, fully interoperable technologies and equipment. Now you come to us and say, fear not, because all we're talking about here is interoperability so that our soldiers can do their best job. And no one would want to deny them that. But I fear, and we're not blind, we're not deaf, we can speak English, we can read the Commission and other documents, we can read the background analysis behind PESCO and the other interoperability mechanisms that we're going into, these NATO partnerships that we are joining. It's all about increasing military spending on hardware. It's all about advancing robotics and drone technology and all the other technologies that I don't trust us, or I don't trust, I'm afraid to say, Europe to best deploy in a way that our armed service, in the tradition that they have excelled in. I've heard the stories of Irish Army officers, heroes, who stood in a difficult situation at a Lebanese village where someone's about to be beaten up and killed, and they've stopped it, and they've halted it, and they've protected the people with the power of a pencil. Just having the bravery to stand in the square and say, I'm showing to the officer, the people carrying out the crime, I'm writing down everything, I'm here and I'm not moving, I'm willing to protect these people by standing as someone who's not just bringing in big guns or big technology or big weapons, but by their bravery and presence on the ground, they averted that death. And I've heard and met Irish, most of the officers you meet, all of them I've met, would do you a sense of pride. I've met the Irish intelligence officers behind certain operations that we've been engaged in Africa, and they were intelligent to the point that they realised that there were all sorts of complexities around European engagements in Africa, which required a diplomatic approach, not a heavy industrial military look at our technology approach. Is it true? Someone told me once that the first thing we did in Liberia, and the US Army actually went to learn but the consequence we did was go into the village and hand over computers to the local community. So we won the hearts of that local community we were protecting so that we could work with them in a really effective way. I've also heard told of Irish Army bases that weren't big industrial, high technology, high spend, but actually they created open fortifications in a sense. They were still secured, but they kept it open so that there wasn't sense of massive walls and massive break between the Irish Army and the people that they were defending. That they would not send out their big fancy vehicles on the small country roads in the middle of the rainy season, but for fear if they did, the local farmers wouldn't be able to then use the roads and get their food to market and only exasperate further the tense situation. That's our skill. That's what we're brilliant at. That's what we bring to peacekeeping. And unfortunately, everything I read, there's talk about, by interoperability, and these SOFA agreements are in a sense a metaphor for interoperability, but by interoperability we can see an average 30% saving if we all bought our helicopters and drone equipment together. But it's not leading to a saving in the budgets, it's leading to an expansion in the budgets. And it's very explicit in terms of, is it a €500 million increase in expending this year, and with a view to ever increasing towards what, as I said at the start, some people see as a true European army as the ideal of where we're going, or indeed full interoperability. A stronger, what did the agreement between NATO and Europe say? That a stronger NATO and a stronger Euro are mutually reinforcing. I'm not too sure we're serving our young men and women if we think that is our particular place in where the world is today. We're in a world which is complex and difficult, where the West is in decline. As Gordon Brown, the former UK Prime Minister, said, 10 years ago, the West accounted for 60% of economic development, of economic activity in the world. Now it's down to 40%. And Europe is going to have to manage what is going to be a relative decline. We have to protect our civilization, we have to look after our citizens, we have to make sure we manage our borders, but not doing it in a way which is Fortress Europe, and not doing it in a way which is all about really a massive investment in an industrial armaments industry base to try and restore, hold on to what we sense we're losing. Europe is going to be great, and we should be great within Europe when we have a slightly different version of where we're going from here. And I think those young men and women that will serve us in that will be better served from a Dáil and an Oireachtas, which actually recognises and signals that, rather than one which is in rah-rah behind industrial armaments expenditure growth as the way forward from here. And that's why we'll be opposing, while we very much want to look after our soldiers, we cannot agree to this motion because it's part of an overall movement that you seem to be taking this country's armed forces in a way that I do not think is secure.